Okay, you can see the installer has reached the point where it wants me to execute a couple of scripts as a part of the configuration, so I'll copy the first script out. I'm just going to right click to open a terminal. You'll see I'm in as user Oracle. I need to switch to root to actually execute these scripts. And I'm going to put a dot, which is really tells the system that this is an executable. I'm going to paste the path that the system and that the installer gave me and hit enter. I need to switch to the root directory really to be able to do what I just did. So let me try that one more time so that the system can find the path I'm giving it. And it's going ahead and it's completed what it needed to do. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy the other script, just doing a Control C, put a dot and paste that path in there, hit enter. I'm going to go ahead and just accept the default here for the path name. And it's completed what it needed to do there. So now I'm going to close this window. Go ahead and tell the installer to keep going, and it's actually going to create our database now. Okay, so if everything went without issue with your install, and it was probably quite a while, I think I'm probably 20-25 minutes into this process for this one, you should get a screen like this at the end that basically indicates that everything was okay and gives you some important connection parameters that you're going to want to keep track of. So I would suggest taking a screenshot of this screen right here so that you never lose it. And then I would also, just for giggles, you can take a look at all of the users that exist on the database whose passwords you could change if you want to. The sys system will be set to that password that you entered during this install process, and with Enterprise Manager you can manage all of these user accounts at a later point. So I wouldn't worry too much about these accounts for the time being. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And the installer is going to say that the installation of my database was successful. Yay! So hopefully that is exactly the same point that you've reached. And after you close this window and confirm that you can connect, I would highly recommend taking another snapshot. Okay. So I'm going to close that installer window, and now I can actually close the window that I originally used to open that installer, and my database should be really alive and kicking at this point. So there's a simple way that we can actually check that, and the way that we do that is we're going to actually need some parameters here. So we're going to need to remember a few of those parameters that we saw on our screen, specifically the SID, but the way that what we're going to do here is actually just pull up SQL Plus on the local machine, and we're going to connect to it and make sure that our database is indeed running. So to do that, I'm going to type dot aura env, and this is going to set a bunch of parameters that make it possible for me to use SQL Plus. And it'll be important to remember this command because you'll be using it again in the future when you want to start your database or stop your database or connect to it on a local machine like this. So I'm going to hit that, My SID in this case is that ORCL, so I'm just going to accept that. Probably if the first time you're doing this, you're going to need to type that in. And then it's going to set the Oracle base and make it possible for you to invoke SQL+. So now I'm just going to type SQL, SQL+, and hit enter. It's going to ask me for a username, and I'm just going to use sys, and I'm going to say as sysdba, because you need to connect as sysdba when you're using the sys user. And I'm going to give it the password, which I set during the install process. And now you can see that I'm connected to the database that we just installed. If I do a simple select star from dual here, you'll see that the database responds to me. So that's a good sign. That means our database is alive and kicking. So the next thing you may want to do is actually be able to connect to this externally with a client. So in order to, like SQL Developer, so in order to do that, we're going to type exit here to get out of SQL Developer, and we're going to see if the listener is up and running. So to do that, we do ls lsnrctl, I think it's status, and you can see that it looks like our listener is alive and well. So what we're going to do now then is pull up an instance of SQL Developer. Okay, now that you've got your database up and running, something that'll make your life a lot easier in the future is you can actually use SQL Developer right here on your Linux desktop. So you notice up here on this top menu that when we hit the applications, there's a number of folders here, and on my machine I've actually gone and added SQL Developer to this menu up here. And I want to show you the way that you do that. First of all, your Oracle database would have had a SQL Developer shell that came with it, and I've actually navigated down to it here, and if you use the same directory structure, yours will be in exactly the same place. And so you can see this file path of U01 app Oracle product 12.1 db1 SQL Developer. This is the directory where the SQL Developer.sh for Linux or exe for Windows is, and we can actually create a shortcut for that and get it into the menu so we don't have to go find it every time. And the way you do that, I've just got another window open here, is you actually navigate one, switch user over to root, which I've already done. That's the command to do it. And then you're going to navigate to this directory called user share applications, which you can see right here. And then you're just going to go ahead and create what's called a desktop file. And it doesn't really matter what the name is, it only matters that the dot part of it is .desktop, and you can see here that I've created a SQL Developer.desktop. So if we open this up with Vim, you'll see that it's pretty simple. You put this tag for desktop entry in between two square brackets, name of the program, SQL Developer, the path to the executable. There's an icon image in that same directory so that there'll be an icon, and then I've just told it it's a type of application, and I think by default it'll just end up dropping it into the other window that we saw up there. So if I escape out of here, that would be the folder that you need to create as a root user, because that'll be the only user that has permissions. Now when we come up here, we should see under applications, if we come down to other, SQL Developer will show up. And when you click on that, it'll actually fire up an instance of SQL Developer in the Linux environment, which you should be pretty used to a SQL Developer at this point. And we can actually create a connection for our database that is living here on our machine. So the easy part of creating a connection here is we just need to refer to the local host. So if I pull up the properties of this connection, I just named it my new 12C database. I used my sys user, saving the password with the password I created. Be sure to change the role to sysdba, because that's the only way that it'll be happy with you. And then you can just say localhost, because the database instance lives on this machine, the default port, and then the SID, which is very likely this ORCL if you didn't change it during the startup process. Now if you test this, that's great, it connects, and I can hit connect, and now I have my familiar SQL Developer interface for our for playing around with my database. So if I expand this out, I will see all of the sys tables here, and I'm a happy guy. I've got SQL Developer, and anytime I come into my machine, I should be able to use it. Alright, so now as far as the screenshot you need to take for proving that you did this assignment, what I'm going to want to see from you is nothing in SQL Developer, but actually a couple of things inside of these windows on the desktop here. So what I want you to do is just go ahead and clear these windows out if they got a bunch of junk in them. And in one of your windows, I'd like you to type the ifconfig, which will show me the fact that your machine is up and running. I just want to see this. And then in the other window that you should have probably used at some point to connect to SQL Plus, I'm going to want you to connect to SQL Plus and show me that your database is running. So I'm going to type SQL Plus here. You'll see it says command not found, because this might be a separate session. I'm going to type .ORAENB. This will set the parameters. My SID for this database is ORCL. And then that's going to go ahead and set all the parameters I need to connect to SQL Plus. Now if I type SQL Plus, it's going to connect. I'm going to connect sys as sysdba, enter my user, and you'll see that I am connected here to my running instance of the database, and that's just the screenshots I should need to see what's going on here. So let me just scoot these windows up so they can both fit on the screen at the same time. And if you'll just take a picture of these two screens for me, and attach that to your assignment, that should be enough to earn you your 50 extra bonus points.